Why do good people, the ones who once held compassion in their hearts and kindness in their actions, suddenly turn into cold, cruel, even monstrous versions of themselves? You've probably asked this before. Maybe after watching the news. Maybe after seeing someone you love change beyond recognition. Or maybe after catching a glimpse of yourself in the mirror and not liking what stared back. This question isn't just philosophical. It's psychological, and it's disturbingly real. In the early 1970s, a quiet corridor at Stanford University turned into a psychological battlefield. The Stanford Prison Experiment, led by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, wasn't just an academic simulation. It became one of the most chilling studies in the history of psychology. 24 ordinary, healthy male college students were randomly assigned roles as guards or prisoners in a mock prison built in the basement of the psychology building. There were no real criminals, no real officers, just students. But what happened next was not acting. Within days, the guards began to display shocking levels of cruelty and domination. They stripped prisoners, humiliated them, forced them into stress positions. Some even showed enjoyment. These weren't sociopaths. They were students. The line between playing a role and becoming a role blurred so fast. Even Zimbardo himself got caught in the illusion of authority. So what happened? What turned young men with no history of violence into psychological tormentors? The answer lies in the power of context, a theme we'll come back to again and again. Zimbardo later said, "The line between good and evil is permeable, and almost anyone can be induced to cross it when pressured by situational forces." And that's the terrifying truth. We think evil is obvious, that it's worn like a mask, carried in bad genes, or whispered in dark corners. But in reality, evil is ordinary. It grows quietly, often disguised as obedience, duty, or just doing my job. This idea was echoed in another chilling study, the Milgram experiment. In 1961, Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram recruited volunteers to participate in what they thought was a study on learning and memory. But the real focus? Obedience. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to another person who was actually an actor whenever they answered a question incorrectly. The shocks weren't real, but the tension was. As the supposed learner screamed in pain, begged for help, even pounded on the walls, the majority of participants, everyday citizens, continued delivering shocks simply because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to. Two-thirds went all the way, to the maximum 450-volt level, even when they believed they were hurting someone. Not because they were cruel, but because they believed they weren't responsible. That's the danger, not in monsters, but in systems that allow normal people to feel like someone else is to blame. So now let me ask you, have you ever followed orders that felt wrong? Laughed at something that made you uncomfortable, just to fit in? Stayed silent when you knew you should speak up? That's where the shift begins. Not with horns or violence, but with silence, compliance, looking away. And it's not just experiments. History is filled with good people committing atrocities, not out of hatred, but because they surrendered their morality to the situation. The Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, Abu Ghraib, all powered not just by the obviously wicked, but by people who never imagined they were capable of such things until they were. The truth is, we all have a shadow. And the scariest part? The more you believe you're immune to it, the more vulnerable you actually are. Let's go deeper. Because this transformation, from kind human to cruel figure, isn't just about power. It's about identity, about how we see ourselves, and how fast we can lose that image when we stop thinking independently. In psychology, there's a term, de-individuation. It means the process by which individuals lose their sense of personal identity and responsibility when they become part of a group. The I disappears. The we takes over. And the we can do things the I never would. Think of a crowd during a protest that turns into a riot. Think of online trolling. Think of hazing rituals and fraternities. Or military abuse under the guise of orders. In all of these moments, the individual becomes submerged. And when that happens, people stop asking, "Is this right?" They start asking, "Is this allowed? Is everyone else doing it? Will I get punished if I don't?" And when those are the questions, ethics no longer matter. Only consequences do. Zimbardo, in reflecting on the Stanford Prison Experiment, said something haunting. The social situation can be more powerful than the individual. We like to think of ourselves as strong, moral, rational. But give someone a uniform, strip away accountability, and they become someone else. This is why you'll hear survivors of traumatic regimes say, "It wasn't just the leaders. It was the neighbors, the co-workers, people I knew who turned overnight." And it's why ordinary citizens in history's darkest chapters, like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia or the Cultural Revolution in China, committed acts of unthinkable cruelty not out of psychopathy, but out of alignment with group identity. But why does the group hold such power? Because humans are wired for belonging. From an evolutionary perspective, isolation meant danger. Being part of a tribe ensured survival. And so, we evolved to prioritize group harmony, even when it clashes with our conscience. A famous study in social psychology, the Asch conformity experiment, showed how powerful this instinct is. Participants were asked to judge the length of lines. The correct answer was obvious. But when everyone else in the room, who were actors, gave a clearly wrong answer, many participants went along with the group, despite what their eyes told them. This wasn't about logic. It was about acceptance. Because being wrong and accepted feels safer than being right and rejected. Now imagine that same instinct amplified. You're in a system that rewards loyalty, punishes dissent, and blurs the line between right and wrong. In that environment, even a small act of resistance can feel terrifying. And submission? It becomes second nature. This is how good people begin to shift. Not through grand, cinematic corruption, but through a slow erosion of personal agency. First, they follow orders. Then they justify them. Then they believe in them. And finally, they defend them. That's the final stage, identification, where people no longer just obey the system. They become it. At this point, speaking out feels like betraying their own identity. And anyone who challenges the system isn't just wrong, they're dangerous. So if you ever wonder, how could they do that? The answer isn't always that they were evil. It's that they became disconnected from their inner compass, replaced it with the compass of the crowd. And here's the scary part. We're all susceptible. If you were raised in a different time, different place, under different authority, are you sure you wouldn't have acted the same? It's not a comfortable question, but it's one we need to ask, because the moment we stop thinking it could be us is the moment we become blind to how it starts. Now that we've seen how group identity erodes personal judgment, let's take it one level deeper. What happens when the entire system is designed to suppress conscience? Welcome to the world of institutional evil, where structures, not individuals, do the thinking, and where the rules themselves are the weapon. This is what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. She wasn't saying evil is boring. She was saying it's ordinary. Routine. A result of people following instructions without questioning the morality behind them. She studied Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi bureaucrat responsible for orchestrating the logistics of the Holocaust. What she found shocked the world. Eichmann wasn't a monster foaming at the mouth. He was painfully average, polite, methodical. He didn't hate Jews. He didn't love violence. He just did his job. And that's what made him terrifying. Because once a system rewards obedience and punishes dissent, cruelty becomes a form of loyalty. And moral silence becomes a career move. Psychologist Stanley Milgram tested this exact dynamic. In his 1961 experiment, participants were asked to deliver increasingly painful electric shocks to another person who was secretly an actor. The shocks weren't real, but the stress on the participants was. And here's the disturbing part. Over 65% of participants delivered the highest level of shock simply because a man in a lab coat told them to. They weren't evil. They were compliant. And in the eyes of the system, that was enough. This shows us something critical. The scariest evils aren't driven by rage or hatred. They're driven by rules, titles, badges, silence. People conform to systems because it gives them safety and a clear script. They don't have to think, only follow. But the moment we stop thinking is the moment we stop being fully human. Consider the case of Abu Ghraib prison. In 2004, photos leaked showing U.S. soldiers abusing Iraqi detainees. Naked prisoners, leashed like dogs, piled in human pyramids, smiling soldiers beside them. How does that happen? The official reports cited lack of oversight, poor training. But the real answer is simpler and darker. It was a system without accountability, a place where empathy was suspended and brutality was normalized. Because once cruelty becomes protocol, kindness becomes rebellion. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us, in the wrong conditions, are capable of things we never imagined. You might say, no, I'd never do that. But so did many of the people who did. Why? Because systems don't ask for evil all at once. They ask for small steps. A little compromise, a little silence, a little participation. And then, one day, you don't recognize the person in the mirror. In a world like that, being good isn't enough. You have to be conscious. Because goodness without awareness is easily weaponized. So how do we stay conscious? It begins with moral courage. The ability to say no when it's easier to say yes. To speak out even when your voice shakes. To question orders, even if it costs you status. We often admire the big heroes, the whistleblowers, the revolutionaries. But sometimes, the bravest thing is simply refusing to laugh at a cruel joke. Or walking away when everyone else joins in. That tiny resistance might seem small, but in a system designed to suppress dissent, small defiance becomes sacred. So what's the way back? If good people can become monsters, can monsters become good again? The answer is yes, but it's not a quick fix. It's not a redemption arc you'll see in the movies. It's uncomfortable, slow, and deeply personal. The antidote to dehumanization is rehumanization, and that begins in the smallest of places, how we treat the people closest to us. Think about it. Evil never starts in a vacuum. It starts in how you speak to your waiter, how you treat someone when they mess up, how you talk about people who aren't in the room. If cruelty is a habit, so is compassion. One of the most powerful studies in this space came from psychologist Philip Zimbardo. Yes, the same man behind the infamous Stanford Prison Experiment. But later in life, Zimbardo shifted his focus from why people do evil to why people choose to do good. He created the Heroic Imagination Project, a movement to teach everyday people how to recognize injustice and take action, even in small ways. Because, in truth, the biggest threat to a corrupt system isn't rebellion. It's awareness. A single person who sees clearly and refuses to look away. And that person could be you. Here's something else you should know. Empathy isn't a fixed trait. It can be trained. Studies at Harvard and Emory University have shown that empathy levels rise with deliberate practice, especially through exercises like perspective-taking, journaling, and even reading fiction. Your brain adapts. Neural pathways of compassion get stronger the more you use them. That means healing isn't just possible, it's teachable. But let's not romanticize this. The journey back from moral collapse is brutal, because it requires facing what you've done or what you allowed. It means sitting with shame, not running from it. It means grieving the version of you that was asleep while others suffered. And yet, that pain is the birthplace of something holy. Responsibility. We live in a time where blame is easy and accountability is rare. But there's a strange kind of power in saying, I didn't know better, but now I do. And I choose differently. You can't change the past, but you can interrupt the pattern. You can be the reason someone feels seen again, heard again. You can make cruelty feel awkward instead of normal. And yes, it will be lonely at times. But you weren't born to blend in. You were born to wake up. Because here's the real truth. It's not the monsters we should fear most. It's the sleepwalkers. The ones who follow the rules without asking who wrote them. The ones who trade conscience for convenience. Silence for comfort. Safety for someone else's suffering. Don't be that. If the system is designed to turn good people bad, then our mission is to stay awake, stay soft, and stay human. Especially when it's hard.